I'm Doug Richardson, and this is photography the way I see it. Welcome back again, YouTube. Thanks for coming back for another episode of Photography the way I see it. Today we're going to talk about telephoto lenses. I know we talked a little bit about them in a previous episode, but we're going to get a little bit more into detail this time. So let's get right into it. I've made some notes here because I'm going to try to go down through here and make sure I cover everything. When you go to buy a telephoto lens, there's something that you need to know about every lens for that matter, whether it's telephoto or not. Basically, a telephoto lens is anything that goes over 50, okay? And that's after your crop conversion, and I'll tell you what that is in case you missed it, another one. The human eye sees at 50 millimeters. So if the lens is above 50, technically it's a telephoto lens because it's bringing it closer. Okay, so that's basically what a description of a telephoto lens is as far as how do I know it's telephoto or not. If it's over 50, it's a telephoto. It's just the higher that number is, the more powerful it is. It's confusing nowadays in digital days because digital cameras use sensors instead of film, obviously. And the millimeter of the lens is based on a full frame photograph taken on basically a 35 millimeter camera. If you have a digital camera that has a large sensor that would be the size of a 35 millimeter negative, there will be no lens factor, crop factor, or lens factor. I've heard it called different things, so whichever you prefer to call it. So if it's a large sensor, there is none. You buy a 300 millimeter lens, you have a 300 millimeter lens. So I'll give you a good example. The Canon 80D has a 1.6 crop factor. What that means is no matter what lens you buy to put on that camera, you multiply the number by 1.6, and that's what you actually have. And I wrote down a couple examples here so the math for me is already done. On that camera, on the Canon D80, it has a 1.6 crop factor. So if you were to buy a 200 millimeter lens, and this has nothing to do with the maximum f-stop or anything like that, this is all focal length, okay? If you buy a 200 millimeter lens for that camera, you actually bought a 320 millimeter lens, 200 times 1.6, okay? A 300 millimeter lens, somebody that has the old film camera, they have a 300 millimeter lens, but you take that same lens, put it on a 80D, do the conversion, and that 300 millimeter lens is now a 480. So if it's a 300 2.8 lens, it's now a 480 2.8 lens. And then you can convert that if you want to get a converter and make it even more powerful if you want. But you will lose a little light with the converter depending on which one you get. And if you buy a 75 to 300 zoom lens, okay, and put it on that camera, that will actually make that a 120 to 480 millimeter lens. So when you're buying the lens, and it's for a digital camera, you need to know what your factor is, your crop factor, because whatever you buy, multiply by 1.6, and that's what you're actually getting. That's a wonderful thing, okay? So that takes care of the crop factor, so now that you understand that, okay? The next thing is, I have been asked, I never know when to use a tripod. Should I always use one? Do I use a monopod? What? Or should you know? I like to hand hold my camera. This is a rule of thumb that I've always used for when is it starting to get kind of iffy, kind of risky to hand hold your camera and you worry about camera shake. It's a very easy formula. Very easy formula. Your shutter speed, your minimum shutter speed to hand hold, is equal to the focal length that you're using. So if you're using a 400 millimeter lens, well, now they have 400th of a second shutter speeds. We didn't have them back then. We was 500 or 250, but they do have 400 now, but I'd say 4 or 500. So it's a real simple formula. 1 over the focal length equals the minimum shutter speed you should be hand holding. So if you're using a 50 millimeter lens, you shouldn't be hand holding under a 60th of a second unless you're very still. And your subject, you don't want your subject to be moving, but you can hand hold it at 60. So if you're using a 1,000 millimeter lens, then you shouldn't be hand holding it under a 1,000th of a second. Because if you've ever looked through a pair of binoculars, you know, you look through, it's hard to hold still because they're so powerful. You're moving an 1/8 of an inch here right in front of your face, but you're moving 10 feet, 100 yards, you know, out in front of you. So you're increasing, it increases everything. It doesn't just increase the size of the subject, it also increases the motion. That's why the formula, okay? The higher the focal length, the more shutter speed you need to hand hold it, or you might want to go at least with a monopod or something that's going to help you steady that camera, okay? So that'll clear that up for you, and that'll help you if you're trying to decide, what do I need to do this or that. The next thing, and this final thing here, a lot of people know what it is, but they really don't know what it is. Okay, they know it when they see it, but they don't know why it does what it does, and that's compression. I'm going to put three different pictures up here, 3 different times, and show you about compression. What compression does is it flattens the background. Instead of a distant background, it takes the background, shoves it all together, and makes it look like your subject is closer to the background, or your background's closer to the subject, however you want to look at it, than it actually is. And I'll give you an example of how they use that to their advantage when they're making movies. If you've ever watched a movie where there's a set of train tracks and the train is coming and somebody is either trapped or stuck on the tracks or trying to get off the tracks to beat the train, they will film that with a very long lens. Because the actors, the stuntmen, stuntwomen, whatever the case would be, they can jump out of the way of that train. It could be 30 yards away or 50 yards away. And they jump out of the way, but the lens compressed everything, made them look like that train was right on top of them, and made it look a lot closer than it actually is. They'll use the lens compression to their advantage to be able to do that. That's what lens compression is. It blurs out the background completely. It helps if you're using a wider open f-stop like 4 or 2.8, depending on what your lens goes to. But I'm going to put the first picture up here. Is going to be a girl playing in a powder puff football game. If you don't know what a powder puff football game is, it's usually done during homecoming at high schools, where the females in the school, the juniors, will play the seniors. They play a flag football game. It's all about bragging rights to the next year. It kind of gets interesting, but that's another story. I won't get off on that. But anyways, that's what this was taken at. And if you notice, the girl that's running, the photograph is of her. She's in a white jersey. There's a girl behind her. Now that girl looks like she is right behind her, but that girl's not that close behind her. She's probably 10 or 12 feet back there, okay? But it looks like she's really close to her. But the wide open aperture combined with the compression just totally blows that background out and almost gives the subject a 3D effect. So that's the first example. Okay, the second one will be of a youth football player throwing a football. The stands are probably 50 to 60 yards. I know it's all silver. There was nobody in that side of the stand, so it's kind of hard to tell that those are stands. But they're back there 50 to 60 yards, way on the other side of the field. And everything is so compressed that your attention goes to the person throwing the football. Okay? It compresses everything and really gives you a great effect. But that's what compression is on these lenses, okay? And then the last one is an individual playing soccer. Now, this was shot with a 300 millimeter lens and a 1.4 converter. It was shot a 3200th of a second at f4 at ISO 200. For those of you who like to know the details of the photographs when they're shot. That's why the ball's like stuck there, because of the fast shutter speed, and because it was a beautiful day out, didn't need to use a high ISO. The 200 worked fine. But as you can see, he's diving to make the save. The lens, or not the lens, but the net, the goal is not that far behind him, or it is a little farther than it looks, not much, but it's all compressed. You know, you got that net, it's all out of focus, and it makes the athlete look three-dimensional. But there's good 3 examples of lens compression and an explanation on why, how it flattens everything to give you different effects, including what I think some of them look 3D because it gives you such good separation between the subject and the background. So I think I covered everything today. Yep, that's pretty much it. So thanks for coming back. And if you learned anything or if you like these videos, please like this, make some comments, subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. It just simply notifies you when there's a new video that comes out that I made. So thanks for coming back again, and we'll see you on the next one.